Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert McGeorge, and I would like to welcome you to Reentry 101, an overview of the MDOC's reentry services. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. You'll notice that your cameras and microphones are disabled, but if you have general questions about the reentry process or services available, you can type them in the Q&A section. I will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the presentation, and if time permits, we will address some of those concerns at the end of the meeting. Please note, we are unable to address case-specific questions in this webinar. In the event we experience technical difficulties with the Q&A, you can email us at mdoc-families@michigan.gov. The link to this event was sent from that email address, so simply reply to that email and we will do our best to respond to your questions after the event. Tonight's event is also being recorded, and a link will be posted on our website and social media channels. With that, I'll turn it over to Mariam Deland to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for everyone for joining tonight. We appreciate you having an interest in learning about the reentry services the Department of Corrections provides, and hope that you find this information helpful. I do have a slideshow, and I'm just going to go through a broad overview of what we provide. And then you'll also hear from one of our contracted reentry service providers, as well as a parole agent, about the role they play in actually providing services to clients in the community. So we call our program simply Reentry Services. However, in the past, you might have heard it by different names. About 20 years ago when it started, it was an initiative in just a few select counties. At that time, it was known as Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, or MPRI. Years later, it changed its name to Prisoner Reentry, and now we go by Reentry Services, or OS Reentry Services. So if you hear any of those names, it's exactly the same program, just different iterations of the name over the years. So I like to just point that out so people know it's exactly the same thing. If you're familiar with MPRI or Prisoner Reentry, that's exactly what I'm talking about tonight. There are a variety of things that the Department of Corrections does to help people prepare for release while they're incarcerated. A few of those are institutional programming, so groups and programs people participate in while they're incarcerated. There are also a variety of educational opportunities, which includes vocational technical programs and college education. Tonight, we're going to focus on the highlighted areas, which is pre-release services and our in-reach process, as well as community-based services. You won't hear a full description of our employment opportunities unit, but I will touch on that and give you a link to learn more as well. So just to give a broad overview of how paroles happen in the state of Michigan, most people that leave Michigan prisons will do so on a parole. And paroles are determined by the parole board. When a prisoner sees the parole board and the board decides to grant a parole, they have three options, as you can see here. They can grant on one end what's called a straight parole. So in some cases, the person will see the parole board and have an interview, but in certain cases, the parole board might grant a parole without having to interview the person. If the person has low risk and low needs on our assessment tool, which is called a COMPASS assessment, they may parole on what we call a straight parole, which doesn't include in-reach services. On the other end of the spectrum, we have some prisoners who are very high needs when they parole, and they may get a deferred parole code called a D47 or a D48. So for those folks, if they have a D47 or a D48 parole, their parole is deferred until a full plan is put in place to accommodate intense mental health needs, or if they're medically fragile, to make sure there's a plan in place for them to go to a hospital or nursing home type of setting. In the middle, we have people who rank as moderate or high risk or moderate or high needs on our assessment tool. And so if the board grants somebody like that a parole, they're more likely to give them what we call a P70 parole. That means they're going to have some in-reach services about 60 to 90 days before they leave prison, before their parole. They're going to meet with reentry staff in the prison, and they're going to have some assessment of their needs before they leave. The board can also grant a P70 parole to somebody who's low risk and low needs if the board thinks that they could use the extra support in the process. Some reasons they might do that is if the person has been incarcerated for a long time, if they don't have housing to live in when they parole, or different reasons like that. So I talked about the D47 and D48 paroles. I'm not going to cover these tonight because people who get these parole codes are served by a different contractor that's separate from our reentry services program. They're served under a contract with an organization called Professional Consulting Services, and their services cover the state of Michigan. So they work with people paroling to all 83 counties. Okay, so we're going to get into an overview of our in-reach process. During in-reach, facilities have a facility coordinator and often an institutional parole agent who assist people who get a P70 parole in their transition planning. During in-reach, people with a P70 parole can expect an in-reach orientation, a home placement verification, a reentry compass assessment, possibly workshops and activities, and then at the end, they'll have what we call a transition team meeting, which will be a video conference with their parole agent, a service provider in the community, and maybe some other providers as well. So that's an overview of what happens during in-reach. If you are on this webinar tonight because you have a loved one who either has a parole or you're hoping will eventually have a parole, this is helpful to know, because if your loved one feels that they will need extra support in their transition home from prison, they can ask the board to grant a P70 parole if they think that these services will be helpful. Okay, this is an overview of the reentry services we provide. The Department of Corrections funds 4 different service types. These include housing, which we call residential stability, economic stability, which includes jobs, education, and access to benefits, social supports, which are the practical things people need like bus passes, clothing, food, hygiene products, as well as health and behavioral health services that aren't covered by Medicaid or insurance. When it comes to eligibility for these services that the MDOC funds, these are available to anybody who has a P70 parole. Students of our vocational villages or SAI boot camp programs are automatically P70s when they leave prison. But even if a person does not have a P70 parole, if they have a P60 or a P61 parole, which are those that we call straight paroles, they're still eligible for these services if they're on parole. In the community, their agent can make a referral. The only difference is that they won't have those in-reach services prior to leaving prison. In 2017, the legislature also granted reentry services to anyone who has their sentence reversed, vacated, or overturned. So in those cases, people are released suddenly without time to plan for their reentry due to a court order. And so we offer them reentry services as well. Services are available to prisoners who are sentenced under the HIDA law. So that's a Holmes Youthful Training Act, and applies to younger people who are sentenced to prison when they're younger. They may leave prison and not be on parole, but if they have a subsequent probation case, we can offer reentry services to them as well. But the main group who do not have access to services are people who discharge from prison after serving their maximum sentence. So if you have a loved one who's going to leave prison after discharging and serving their max sentence, we cannot spend reentry funds to provide them services. We do provide aftercare planning, and we do connect them to community resources, but our legislative appropriation cannot be spent on people who aren't under our jurisdiction unless they fall under the case of having their sentence reversed, vacated, or overturned. It's also helpful to know that all participants must be referred for services by their agent. So when you hear from Agent Lindsay Simon, who's on the call tonight, she'll talk about the importance of having a good relationship with the parole agent and what you can do as a family member or loved one of somebody who's coming home. If you are interested to be involved in the governance of your local reentry services, each region of the 10 regions of the state of Michigan have a steering team that governs reentry services in their region. They determine the budget and the programming that's needed in their community. And it's made of people from a variety of perspectives. We have a person with lived experience of reentry, a representative of our field operations administration, which is the regional manager of the local parole and probation. We have a corrections facility staff, which is typically a warden or somebody in leadership from one of our prisons. We have a member representing the community and a representative of our contractors. Other members of the community can be involved in steering teams or advisory councils. So if you're interested in being involved, I would encourage you to reach out, and we have a list of our local community coordinators on the website. I can put a link to that in the chat when I'm finished, and that's a great way to be involved locally if you have an interest in doing so. This is a map of the prosperity regions of Michigan and shows a list of our 10 contracted administrative agencies who provide these services. They provide them regionally, either they directly provide the services or they subcontract them out. So depending where you're from in the state, you might be familiar with the agency that has the reentry contract in your region. Okay, I'm going to get into some of the details of what we actually provide. This is where we get a lot of interest and questions about what type of housing assistance can be provided. I'm happy to say that in the state of Michigan, people don't lose an opportunity to parole simply because they don't have housing when they parole. So in other words, people don't stay incarcerated as a result of homelessness in MDOC facilities. If a person is granted a parole by the board and they don't have a place to live, they can live in one of our transitional housing locations while they work toward a permanent solution. We have two types of housing. The majority of our housing locations, which include over 280 locations statewide, almost every county has at least one location, except for a few of our very rural counties. And most of them are either apartments or rental houses or hotel or motel rooms that our contractor rents out and is able to place clients in temporarily. Oftentimes, people will be living with a few other people who are in the program and they'll live together. They will get assistance from a housing specialist that works for our contracted reentry service providers, and that person will help them develop a plan for long-term housing. We also have some facilities around the state that we consider 24/7 structured housing. Those are facilities that are typically staffed for other types of programs, and facilities that have staff 24/7, typically lock up medications, etc. Sometimes people are sent there as a result of problematic behavior in base housing, but oftentimes they're housed in a 24/7 location just simply for housing, or because those are programs that can offer some extra supports to people in their first 2 weeks of release, like meals and help making appointments. Those are the two types of housing we provide. We have a really comprehensive housing program in Michigan compared to many other states. However, we do have some limitations. Our housing is temporary. Our guideline is 90 days. People are initially typically given a guideline of 90 days in housing, and then during that time, they'll be working toward their long-term plan. Parole supervisors and managers can grant extensions. However, those extensions can't go beyond the end of the parole period. So it's really important for people to utilize that time to adjust to the community, to gain an income, to save their money, to take care of their other needs like mental health, physical health needs, etc., so that they can be successful when they move out on their own. Another limitation of our housing is sometimes it feels like an extension of prison because people that live in our housing have to follow house rules versus living on their own or living with a family member. It can be really hard to find housing in Michigan right now. As everybody knows, we have a housing shortage. And so we have many counties in the state, especially in rural areas, where there just aren't very many rentals. But we do use a process of housing inspections and subcontracting and hotel motel licensing to ensure that our housing is to reasonable and livable standards. But another limitation is that people who go into our housing don't have transportation. So we've got to figure out ways that we can find housing in walkable neighborhoods or close to bus stops. And then finally, another limitation of housing is that with the housing shortage in Michigan, it can be really hard for people to move out, even if they can find a landlord that will rent to them and they can find a unit. It may not be affordable, or there just might not be housing available in their area. Our contractors help people do job search or go through training programs to get a higher paying job. They can also buy work supplies for somebody who has a job offer and needs supplies or tools to start that job. They can help people enroll in GED or college programs, and they can help people apply for public benefits. They can provide these practical things. Most people now leave prison in Michigan with a state ID or driver's license. I think we're in the mid 90% of people leaving prison have a state ID or driver's license. However, if they do leave prison without one, our contractors can help them to get that in the community as well as other vital documents. We provide a lot of bus passes and access to public transportation. Our contractors give out lots of food kits and clothing supplies, hygiene products, and they can also fund and support mentoring programs in the community. I'll talk a little bit more about mentoring at the end of my presentation. And finally, our contractors can fund a variety of health and behavioral health services. Basically, anything that a person needs in this category that is not covered by Medicaid or Medicare or a person's private insurance, typically our contractor can fund those things. So if your loved one has needs in these areas or has an interest in accessing counseling services and doesn't have insurance coverage, they could be referred for funding for that, as long as they meet the eligibility for the program. I'm also happy to share that the Department of Corrections has a mentoring program that's available to anybody across the state. You can, if you have a loved one that might be interested, you can jot down Tony Mills' email address and phone number. He is our mentor coordinator, and our program is called Walk a Mile Mentoring Program. So the idea of walking a mile in somebody's shoes. The majority of our mentors are people who have been through reentry themselves. They've been incarcerated, they know what it's like to come home, and they want to help the next person coming home. They're all people who have been recommended. If they were on parole or probation supervision, they've been recommended by their current or former agent, and they volunteer to give back. We do also have a variety of paid mentor programs that OS funds, but those are regional, and the Walk a Mile mentoring program is available anywhere in the state. So I would encourage anyone who's coming home to consider getting a mentor. If it doesn't work out and it's not a good fit for them, no hard feelings, but the more supports a person can have, the better, especially when it comes to somebody understanding what it's like to walk in their shoes. So that's a good resource that you can take away from this. And then I also wanted to share a resource. The department has what we call an employment opportunity unit, which is a team of staff who work with employers across the state of Michigan to create job opportunities for people who've been justice involved. Anyone who's on parole or probation can use this QR code to complete a referral. And so this would be a good time if you have your smartphone out and you have an interest in learning more about this resource. You can scan this QR code now, or you can do it later on the recording, and reach out to the Employment Opportunity Unit if you or a loved one has difficulty finding a job, or you want to know about better opportunities or opportunities in a different area. This is a great resource as well. There are a couple things I want to talk about as far as why we do what we do. In addition to helping people and stabilizing communities, there's a really big return on investment for reentry work. Incarcerating folks is expensive in terms of the money that it costs to incarcerate a person, and also the community loses potential involvement of one of its community members. People are members of families, neighborhoods, workplaces, etc. MDOC measures our 3-year return to prison rate, and so that's how we measure recidivism. For people who receive reentry services, their return to prison rate, well, for our entire prison population, let me rephrase that. Our entire prison population has a 22% return to prison rate within 3 years, which is the lowest ever. It's been cut in half from what it was when we started providing reentry services 20 years ago. And that's a huge achievement, because that means about 78% of people are staying out of prison at least 3 years. So in terms of what you can tell your loved ones about reentry services, you've got the resources that I shared above. You're going to hear from one of our providers shortly and one of our parole agents about how you can help support your loved one and how you can help them access resources. If you are a person who's in the community who's been justice involved, or if you're a loved one of somebody who's been justice involved and they're not eligible for our program, we can still help connect them to resources. Your local reentry services is still a good place to go if you have questions about resources and what's available. And I have a couple other resources too. I'll put these actual links in the chat after I finish. But this is not a Michigan Department of Corrections resource. However, the State Appellate Defender's Office created a really comprehensive reentry guidebook, which I think is super helpful. It's a PDF, downloadable PDF that you can access online. I'll put the link in the chat. And it really breaks down how to do a lot of the things people need to do when they come home. So I think that's a really helpful resource. And then the Department of Corrections also has a contract with Kelvin College to map out resources that are available in the state of Michigan to people who've been justice involved, or even resources that are available to the general public and also people who've been justice involved. And that includes all types of resources. I don't have it on this slide, but I always like to tell people about 211. Also, the phone number 211, anybody in the state of Michigan can call from anywhere to find out about resources available in their area as well. So that's another great resource. So that's the end of my slideshow. I hope that that was helpful. I can't remember, to be honest, if I'm turning it over to Lindsay or Kendall next. So Lindsay, okay. So next you're going to hear from Agent Lindsay Simon. I'll let her introduce herself. And then as things come up, if you have general questions you'd like to put in the chat, sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A feature, we can address those as well if we have time at the end. So thank you, and go ahead, Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wexford County, Northern Michigan, where it's sleeting outside. Sorry. For those of you who don't know where Wexford County is, we are in Cadillac area, just south of Traverse City. So yes, we're kind of getting that storm that's coming in. I am happy to be a part of this. I'm very passionate about helping people succeed. And I'm kind of biased because the offender success staff that we work with up here in Northern Michigan, I feel they're some of the best. They've been super helpful with us. They're super helpful for our clients. Like it's a good team effort. So I'm happy to be able to provide some information on how we move forward. One of the most common questions that we get a lot is, let's say my loved one was sentenced out of Wexford County, but I actually want to go live in Kent County per se. That could be possible. A lot of it boils down to support. So if somebody has a loved one that lives in Kent County that they can parole to their home, it's a safe place for them, it's stable. Absolutely. When they're in the prison system, they can send a, what we call, it's a pre-parole to Kent County with the name and the address of that loved one that they want to live with. That's where the agent comes into play. We receive the paperwork. We reach out to this individual. We do home calls. We make sure that we have a good supportive network around them, and we can accept it or deny it based on how the situations are. Sometimes we have pre-paroles where somebody wants to go live, in a place that is maybe a drug house or weapons, and we know that's not good for their success. So we will, even if it's something that's denied, we continue to work with either family or friends and try to find them a safe place to come back into the community. A lot of it is, it's re-entering the community, whether somebody's been in prison for 6 months or 16 years. It's a tough adjustment to come back anywhere that they decide to go. So our goal is to try to help them re-enter successfully. So yes, it's, even though you're sentenced out of a certain county, there's always a possibility that you can live in a different county. We just have to do a little research and background on it. So let's say I accept a pre-parole on Joe Schmo. After that pre-parole is accepted, we set up an in-reach typically. And this is even for clients. If I have a client who's not necessarily a P70 client, if it's D47 deferred, or even like the low risk, the P60s and the P61s, I still like to talk to them ahead of time. We come from, it's a smaller county up here, so a lot of the clients we know and we've worked with before. But I also like to set up communications with them, whether it's over the phone, whether it's a video, whether it's a team meeting in some sort where I can communicate with that person. I had a gentleman today that I communicated with, never met him before. He's new to the area and he had a lot of nerves. He says, I didn't know what to expect. I don't know, I get out in a month. Who am I going to see? Where am I going? And that kind of alleviated some of that. Not all of it, understandably, but some of that, knowing who he was going to be working with and the reassurance that, hey, I'm here to help you. I'm not here to send you back. So yes, we do the meetings, we set up the in-reaches. Oftentimes, well, all the time, I should say, during the in-reaches, offender success staff will also video in with us. So I can kind of introduce myself and what my role is as an agent. And then I turn it over to offender success who can discuss, what some of their needs are, what referrals I may be making, transportation, all of that stuff. So it's a unified effort. And then I also encourage family. Like I tell people what I do the video with. I'm like, if you have questions, if your family has questions, they're more than welcome to reach out. This is not something that we can do on our own. It's not something that the family can do on their own. And it's not something Offender Success can do on their own. But the old saying of it takes a village to raise a child is true, right? For all of us, because we all need to work together to be successful. So we have the pre-parole, it's approved. We've done our in-reach meeting. We also want to make sure a big step of success is having transportation to get to the parole office the day they're released. So we try to set that up ahead of time, whether it's family transportation, a bus, whether DOC is going to be providing transport. We make sure we have all that in place. So initially walking out the doors, they feel safe knowing they're going to get where they need to go immediately. Okay. They arrive in the office, we will go over everything that we need to with them. And a lot of it's overwhelming that first day. So they may say, hey, Miss Simmons, I think I need some bus passes. I think I need a clothing voucher. And I think that's it. So I send a referral. I give them the items that they need. I also send a referral to Offender Success. Suddenly Offender Success sets up a meeting with them. And I get another email that says, Joe Schmo forgot he needs help with the driver's license. He needs help with employment. Sounds good. I have no objection to that. We all communicate. The offender, the loved one's family, Offender Success, like we're all working together to make sure that this is a smooth transition. We want to help as much as we can. Granted, yes, we have some clients over the years that have tried to possibly take advantage of that. We monitor, what's going on in their life, how they're doing, what, to what services can we provide and what services have they overused. And I know with housing too, housing is tough. Like Mariam said, housing is I've never seen housing as tough as it is right now. And I think that's the biggest concern for some people when they get out. Sure, they maybe have a commercial place to go. In Wexford County, we have a motel up in Mesick that the owners have been fantastic working with us and working with Offender Success. But they're scared. There's, 30, 60, 90 days into it, and they still don't know what they're going to do. Offender Success continues to work with them while they're on supervision to find long-term housing. I can think of one parolee in particular. It was well over a year that Offender Success and I were working, like every week we communicated. What options have we researched? What places, like it was a little checklist. And eventually we were able to get them into stable housing. So it's not like, hey, 30, 60, 90 days, we're done. Sorry, we're going to close the case. That's not how this works. We want everybody to be successful. So yes, the referrals, as soon as somebody gets out, I send the referral over to Offender Success. We start coordinating on what some of their needs are. And all needs are, I call them fluid, I guess, more than anything. Because again, you may need something one day and then, oh my gosh, like you wake up the next morning going, why didn't I think of this before? That's okay. That's where the loved ones will talk to me. Offenders will talk to me. Hey, I completely forgot about this. What are your thoughts? Communication is big. Then we get a hold of the guys and gals with Offender Success and say, hey, we think this might be beneficial as well. So I think a lot of it too, and maybe that's why I'm so passionate about this, is I want to see people succeed. And I know a lot of people in the department feel that way, of course, but you just, with the opportunities that we have, like with the support that we have, it makes our jobs easier, right? It makes us helping them easier. It makes the whole system a little bit more fluid. And we've got a really good group that we're working with. So however we can do that to help people be successful and work around some, whether it's housing or employment, anything along those lines, we want to be able to do that. I think I've kind of covered everything I wanted to talk about, unless there's questions that people will have later. But I would like to transition over to Ms. Kendall, who can describe all of the wonderful resources that Offender Success can offer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kendall Rodriguez, and I'm the Region 2 Community Coordinator with OS Reentry Services. So I have the pleasure as being one of the 10 community coordinators throughout the state of Michigan, providing these reentry services to your loved ones once they exit from prison. So the insight that Agent Simon was able to provide you really sheds light on the parole side of things, which serves as a great segue into how your loved one then gets connected to reentry services. So as you heard Mariam and Agent Simon say, that term in reach is very popular. So before your loved one is released, we are really taking the time for all of these units to come together to discuss your loved one's exit plan. So we have your parole agent, your loved one's parole agent, your loved one, as well as a member from OS Reentry, and a member within the reentry unit inside of the prisons. So we're all setting up a video conference for all of these parties to come together the same time, the same day, and really talk about that exit plan in preparation for your loved one being released. So we're really taking the time to discuss several different factors. A big one, as Agent Simon referred to, is transportation. So on day one, when you're released from prison, how are you getting home? So we're talking about, in many instances, we see family, friends, coworkers, etc., coming to pick up their loved one from the prison on day one. But in some instances, that's not necessarily the case, and that can't be done. So we're taking the time to really facilitate how we're going to get your loved one home to their county where they're going to be residing. We also will talk about what does your housing situation look like. So sometimes houses are at capacity. You don't have that capacity to take another person in. Maybe there's conditions with their parole term that's stopping them or limiting them from living with you. So we have that transitional housing piece to kind of serve as that immediate housing need. And during that process, we'll take a lot of time to discuss housing in depth with your loved one as well. We will also talk about employment plans. So what do you have lined up, if anything? So a lot of the time we'll see employers that your loved one was working with prior to incarceration wants that loved one back. They want your loved one coming back and working for them again. Or sometimes we'll see family members help their loved one find a job. But in some cases where that doesn't happen, again, we're here to serve as that resource for that employment piece. And as Mariam said, the reentry unit inside of the prisons has really focused on vital documents. So birth certificate, social security card, identification card. We're really trying to help and assist your loved ones to leave with those vital documents on day one of their release. So we're really talking about what are they leaving the prison with and what still might be pending, because we can help assist in that process too. And then lastly, we like to cover a lot of what we call social supports. So again, we're referring to that transportation piece. We're referring to that maybe hygiene item. Do you have a toothbrush? Do you have shampoo? Do you have what you need to get started on day one? So we're really talking about what can we get you on that first day. So as you guys heard, OS Reentry works specifically on a referral basis with your loved one's parole agent. So as Agent Simmons said, she's doing that pre-parole, we're doing the in-reach, we're getting a really good idea of where your loved one's at. And then from there, the referral will come through to our program to provide these services to your loved ones. So once OS has taken the time, we've gotten to maybe call your loved one, set up an appointment. We're really going to focus on what that referral outlines in terms of services. So maybe your loved one needs X, Y, and Z. We'll start with this and kind of go and assess from there. So Mariam kind of gave an overview of what OS Reentry looks like. We have 4 different service category types that we primarily work with. That first one being economic stability. And this one is kind of a bigger umbrella to, several different services. So under economic stability, we have what we call job placement services. where we're working with your loved one to find and obtain job placement. So we want to work with them to find an employer, find a full-time position, find what their skill sets have and what they're looking to do. Maybe they're looking to go into a career path, whatever that may be. But we're talking about resume building, interview preparation. We're going to talk about that limited work history for some people, or that gap in employment. How do you address that with an employer? What do you do when you have a felony on your record, and how do you kind of get that message across to your employer? We also have wage subsidies for those who maybe have a very limited work history. Again, that is very case by case basis though, because not everybody needs that kind of incentive to kind of get that starting position or the entry level job. And we might also say your loved one already has a job, but they need some boots or they need some work tools to get started. We can, of course, try to talk with their agent and kind of assess, hey, he's doing great or she's doing great. She could just benefit from this, that, or, the other. We also focus on education services. So whether that is GED or high school equivalency, a lot of the time we see individuals start this process inside of the prison, but they still need to finish maybe a couple tests or their final exam or however that may be. So we'll help kind of bridge that gap and get them connected to those educational services. We also focus on post-secondary education. So maybe your loved one is looking to get an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. We can help bridge them to that resource as well. And then we also focus on career technical education. So more of that trades work. Maybe your loved one did the vocational village while they were incarcerated and they want to take that skill set and make it a career. So we're really just assessing those education pieces and putting those together. We also do financial services. So we're working with building budgets, doing credit checks, credit history. We will also help your loved one apply for benefits. So maybe they need some food benefits to get them started, or Social Security, tribal benefits, whatever that may be. We can serve as that resource as well under the economic stability umbrella. So that's the first main category. I know it's a mouthful, but the second major service category that we offer is what we call residential stability. So that's going to be that housing component piece. So we're taking the time to really look and take the time with your loved one to support them in finding long-term housing, because a big piece of this program is creating self-sufficiency for your loved one and that independence piece. We want your loved one to feel independent and become self-sufficient. So we're working to find that transitional housing. So my team, whether that is, this county, Traverse City, Lindsay's county down in Wexford, we're always looking for new partnerships to create transitional housing, because it serves as that immediate housing portion and piece for those who may not have a place to go. Because that's one thing we really want to avoid and prevent is anything regarding homelessness or unhoused. We don't want your clients or loved ones to have to worry about that. We also focus on what we call getting your loved one housing ready. So in order to apply for an apartment, a condo, a house, whatever that may be, you're going to need vital documents, and they're going to look at a lot of your history. So we're working with your loved one to kind of dive into that history, get an idea of where they're at, and really just assess, does your credit look right? Does this make sense? Do you have utilities in your name? How do these all impact your ability to apply for long-term housing as of right now? We also will work on income and budgeting. So once we've kind of gotten your house ready, we're also going to work on your income and kind of figure out how you can make your expenses and meet your expenses each month without feeling like stressed out and overwhelmed all the time, because rent, as we all know, is extremely expensive. So we're taking the time to really go in and talk about these things on a deeper level. We also participate in the Housing Choice Voucher Program through MSHDA. So we can help those who are eligible to find lower income housing through the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which would ultimately allow them to pay 30% of their income towards their rent. So it will save a lot of money. But if any of you have been through that process, it's very time consuming. And there's you have to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted. So we're here to really make sure that that's done in a timely manner because there is a strict deadline on that. We also do housing search and advocacy. So maybe your loved one has been running into road bumps with landlords. They can't get anywhere because of their felony. We can serve as that advocacy piece and call on behalf of your loved one. And something that I also want to mention, it is very dependent on the funding resource at this time, but we do participate in rental assistance as well. So maybe your loved one has found their own apartment or house, but as you guys know, typically to rent, you need to have first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit to move in. So we can kind of serve as that security blanket if allowed with the funding source to provide that rental assistance for your loved one to kind of eliminate some of that stress. So that is kind of our second big umbrella. Our third is what we call health and behavioral health services. So as Mariam said, a lot of the time we are working with different mental health care providers or just different health providers in the area to find long-term care, but to also provide those kind of that care that doesn't get covered by your insurance plan. So we have some unique programs through our mental health services, behavioral health services, but again, we kind of ultimately want your loved one to connect to those long-term care services as well. So we kind of help fill that gap during the process too. And then our last but big category is what we call social support services. So this is where we're kind of filling in those outlying or miscellaneous kind of life things. So we're talking about hygiene and food assistance. So again, we're coming back to that hygiene, food. What are you going to need when you first get out? Transportation. So how are you going to get from point A to point B each day? We're going to talk about clothing. Do you have what you need to get started? Maybe you have an interview with an employer. Do you have what you need for that interview? And then again, we might talk about identification. So maybe your loved one left the prison with all of their vital documents, but they're ready to obtain their driver's license at this point. So we would then talk to their parole agent, talk with your loved one, and really come to terms on, all right, he's ready to go. We're ready to do this. So that is pretty much our services in a nutshell. But as Agent Simon and Mariam both said, we understand that different needs pop up at different times. So what your loved one might need on day 1 might be a lot different from day 40. So I just really also want to take the time to let you all know that the overall support from family and friends and loved ones during this reentry journey makes all the difference. OS Reentry is here to provide that resource and be a support system, but ultimately you guys are providing that area of support, that stability, and just being that person during a major transition. So I just want to stress the importance of family and friends and everybody during this time. So that's all I have, but thank you.
Thank you, Kendall, and Lindsay and Mariam. I do have a few questions that have popped up that I'd like to address. We have a few minutes left in our meeting, and I'm going to start off with a question for Lindsay. What strategies do you recommend for families to effectively communicate and build a supportive relationship with their loved ones during the reentry process?
Oh gosh, I think, and it could be tough because there are some people, like my initial response is, start with the agent. Like communicate with us. We can kind of help bridge that gap. But then it's also kind of cautious sometimes too, because maybe some, offenders, loved ones, they don't necessarily want their family to know everything. I think with us, like I learn as much from the family about how to help as the family learns from me on how to help. So a lot of it is building that communication. Communication is key. And another big thing that I've learned too is not to overwhelm the person. Like you're just as excited to have them home as they are to be home, but try not to overwhelm them like every day going, okay, how are you doing? What do you need? That can be overwhelming. Like when they first get out, they're excited to see you. They're probably going to need some space too. That's not always a bad thing. Space is good. Any suggestions that you may have in the community. So if it's somebody that was sentenced in Wexford, but they're going to Kent to live with a family member, that may be a new area to them. So, hey, here's a list of resources that I may have researched ahead of time if this is helpful. If not, I completely understand. So to be supportive, but to try to find that happy balance of not be overwhelming. Because we do, as agents, we expect a lot. You know, we want them to follow their parole conditions. So not only do they have the family that's like, okay, are you doing okay? And you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You also have the agent going, okay, what have we reached this week? What are we working on? So I think strategy is good support, be as loving as possible, but also try to give them their space. Yeah, just communication and space.
Great advice. My next question is for Mario. How does the Michigan Department of Corrections involve families in the reentry planning process? And what role can a family member play in facilitating a successful transition?
Thanks. So the first thing that a family member can do is potentially attend a parole board hearing. If your loved one has a hearing, you can go to the parole board hearing with them. It's really an interview with one member of the parole board. I've sat in on some of them myself just to see what that process is like. And it's really a conversation with a parole board member. So it can be helpful to have a loved one there, not only as a support, because people are generally nervous, but also just to add information that the person might not think to share, or to add more background and detail to let the board know what kind of support that your loved one has or what you think they might need. So that's the first piece. And then once they're granted a parole, putting together a plan. Where are they going to live? What are they going to need to take care of when they get out? And then my biggest advice to everybody, both people on parole and family members, is to make the agent your best friend. Agent Simon, I'm sorry I said Simon, but I was determined to get it right before I hung up. Make that agent your best friend. You know, she did mention that some people want their loved one to be involved and some might want their privacy, which is fine, but it can be really helpful for the agent to know more about what's going on with the person's life and for the person to have the support and advocacy. You're going to have some parole agents like Agent Simon who are going to say, tell me everything you need and how can I support you? And then you're going to have other agents that kind of just let the parolee lead by sharing their needs. And as you know, some people are really good at bringing their needs to the forefront and saying, I need help with finding a job. And other people aren't good at asking for help. So it can be helpful to have a loved one to say, Agent so-and-so, I can see my loved one's getting discouraged as they're looking for a job. Do you have leads that could help them? Is there a referral they can get to get assistance with job search? I think it can be really helpful for people to have a loved one that's involved with the agent. So those are the two main ways that I would say to get involved is consider going to the parole board or at least writing letters to the board on your loved one's behalf, and then really getting to know the agent. And, you know, helping in the planning for the transition, I think is helpful too. But the big ones is the parole board hearing and getting to know the agent.
Thanks, Mario. Kendall, from your experience, what are the most common challenges faced by individuals reentering society after incarceration, and how can families best prepare to support their loved ones in overcoming these obstacles? And I'm going to add one thing to that. What is one thing that most people don't think of that they have to overcome transitioning home? I think housing is probably the number one obstacle, but is there something that most people overlook?
So I would say in my experience, it really depends on the felony itself, but I would also say getting your communities to understand because you have a felony does not make you less qualified, does not make you any less of a person, and really just trying to shift that community idea and mindset. So I just want to share with you guys, for Region 2, we've been working on jail simulations within our community to try to put people in the shoes of those returning home, because you really get to see what it's like and all the struggles or benefits potentially, but rarely more so barriers or struggles when you're coming home. Whether it's how do I get from point A to point B? How do I get a bus pass? How do I make sure that I have a place to go? Where am I going to sleep tonight? We really serve as that big middle, person here, but I would say it's the shifting of your community and the outlook on just having a felony record. I think just the stigma alone is one of the hardest things to kind of shift people's mindset on. But I think for our region specifically, housing has been a challenge, but more so just getting people to understand that this is a person. We're not dealing with a thing. We're not dealing with something that isn't living and breathing. We're dealing with people. And these people are returning home, and they're going to be your neighbors. They're going to be your coworkers. They're going to be the people you see at the grocery store. And just really reiterating that having a felony, you have skill sets, you have knowledge, you are a good person. We just really have to kind of change that mindset. And I think we're slowly doing that one step at a time. But I hope I answered that question. I just think that it's, for us up here, it's really just shifting the community's outlook.
For sure. Thank you. Last question. We've got just a couple more minutes, and I open this up to anybody that has a thought. But the question is, what can I do to assist as a community member?
I'm jumping off what Kendall said here, but it just made me think of a conversation Kendall and I had yesterday about more. So I've worked in Wexford County for a long time, and I know a lot of people in the community, whether it's because I've supervised them or I've dealt with families, like employment. Kendall and I had this conversation yesterday. We were doing an in-reach with somebody and discussed, like, she was kind of watching the whole interaction because I've known this individual, and yep, you're going to stay with so-and-so and you're going to live here with so-and-so. And afterwards, Kendall and I talked, and she's like, hey, can you pass on the number of that employer? Do you think they'd be interested in working with us? And I think that's a lot of it, like with the community resources. If you're in the community and you are interested in hiring some of our clients, I mean, some of our, like Kendall said, they have amazing skill sets. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, is to reach out and say, hey, we're able to assist in, like, whether it's housing, we have this old bed and breakfast that we want to fix up for housing, or we have employment. I mean, that's a lot of it as a community. And again, just not treating anyone differently. Like they're human beings, just like the rest of us. They have amazing skill sets. They have a lot to offer. It's just sometimes it's hard to see that based on a piece of paper. So yeah, just reaching out. If you have opportunities, or if you have jobs and you want to help people get a job, things like that, that's a big thing for us. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Kendall. Okay. I wish that Tony could speak up on this one too. Tony Gant was our host tonight, but due to technical difficulties of all of us learning how to do Teams town hall format like this, we had some issues. So he's not able to speak, but I think he's somebody who's involved both as a person who's been through it and as a community member. And I think it's really, really important to remember MDOC is involved in this not because our expertise is reentry. We have funding, we have power as an organization, we have authority, we have responsibility. But reentry work is about the people coming home, to Kendall's point, and it's about communities receiving family members and community members home. So reentry work cannot just be the DOC. It really has to have the involvement of community members, of organizations, of employers, of landlords. And the format that we provide for people to get involved in that way is local advisory councils. So if you look in the Q&A, you'll see a list of the local community coordinators, and you could reach out to your local community coordinator if you, as a community member, whether you have lived experience or you have a loved one, or you're here because you're a service provider or social worker. If you're interested in being involved, just knowing what's going on and having input, please, by all means, reach out to your local community coordinator, find out when your local meetings are and how you can be involved. I think that's just critically important.
Yeah. And just, again, I just want to say it again, but really just getting people in our communities to understand that we're dealing with some great people who have great skill sets, who have been through some stuff. But if anything, they're more eager than the other candidate, like we're trying to help and shift these mindsets of people that have been, and it's been engraved for generations and years of just, oh, felony, the term felony, we don't want to make that ugly anymore. And just understanding that it was a hiccup, and we're here to help you rebuild. And that's really what it comes down to. So
Fantastic advice. That will wrap up our presentation for this evening. Thank you, Lindsay, Mariam, and Kendall. A lot of great information was shared here tonight. As a reminder to our guests and our attendees, if you have any questions, you can also reach out to us by email. Respond to the email that provided you this link for the meeting, and that email is mdoc-families@michigan.gov. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
All right, I guess we're all signing off. Thanks, Kendall. You did awesome.
thanks, Mariam. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.